Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 30. King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue. It was 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all of the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all of the rulers of the provinces assembled for the dedication of King Nebuchadnezzar's statue. They stood in front of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. The herald called out loudly, "To you peoples, nations, and languages, this command is given. When you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the harp, the triangular harp, the drum, and all kinds of musical instruments, you will fall down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into the blazing fiery furnace." Therefore, when all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the harp, the triangular harp, and all kinds of musical instruments, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At that time, some Chaldeans approached the king and maliciously accused the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Your Majesty, may you live forever. You, Your Majesty, gave an order that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the harp, the triangular harp, the drum, and all kinds of musical instruments must fall down and worship the golden statue, and whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the blazing fiery furnace. There are Jews whom you appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men do not pay attention to you, Your Majesty. They do not serve your gods, and they do not worship the gold statue that you set up." Then in a furious rage Nebuchadnezzar said to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods and that you do not worship the golden statue that I set up? Now, if you are ready, at the time when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the harp, the triangular harp, the drum, and all kinds of musical instruments, you must fall down and worship the statue I made. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be thrown into the blazing fiery furnace. What God will be able to save you from my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered King Nebuchadnezzar, "We have no need to answer you about this matter. Since our God, whom we serve, does exist, he is able to save us from the blazing fiery furnace. So, he may save us from your hand, Your Majesty. But if he does not, you should know, Your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage, and the expression on his face changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He said to heat the furnace 7 times hotter than it was usually heated. He ordered some men, who were soldiers from his army, to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to throw them into the blazing fiery furnace. So these men were bound in their coats, their pants, their turbans, and their other clothing, and they were thrown into the middle of the blazing fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace was extremely hot, those men who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were killed by the intense heat of the fire. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who had been tied up, fell into the blazing fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was startled and immediately stood up. He said to his advisers, "Didn't we throw 3 men, who had been tied up, into the middle of the fire?" They answered the king, "Certainly, Your Majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men, who are untied and walking around in the middle of the fire, unharmed. What is more, the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar approached the door of the blazing fiery furnace. He said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the middle of the furnace. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the royal advisers gathered together and looked at these men. The fire had no power over their bodies. Not a hair on their head was singed. Their robes were not damaged, and the smell of fire had not stuck to them. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and saved his servants, who trusted in God and ignored the king's command. They gave up their bodies and did not pay homage or worship any god except their God. So I have issued an order that every people, nation, and language that speaks any blasphemy against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut to pieces, and his house shall be turned into a pile of rubble, because there is no other God who is able to save like this." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 through 28. It seemed like a good plan to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom. They were to rule throughout the kingdom. Above them there would be 3 supervisors. Daniel was one of them, to whom these satraps would report, so that the king would not suffer any loss. It came about that this Daniel distinguished himself above the supervisors and satraps, because there was an outstanding spirit in him. So the king intended to promote him so that he would be in charge of the entire kingdom. Then the supervisors and satraps kept trying to find a basis for an accusation against Daniel in regard to his administration of the kingdom. However, they were unable to come up with an accusation or any evidence of corruption, because he was trustworthy and no neglect of duty or evidence of corruption could be found against him. Then these men said, "We will not find any accusation to bring against this Daniel unless we find something against him concerning the law of his God." So these supervisors and satraps came as a group to the king and said this to him, "Darius, your majesty, may you live forever. All the supervisors of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the advisers and the governors advised the king to establish and enforce a decree that prohibits anyone to pray a prayer to any god or person for 30 days except to you, your majesty. Anyone who does so will be thrown into the den of lions. Now your majesty, please establish the decree and sign a document that cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians that cannot be revoked." That is why King Darius signed the written decree. Now, when Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went to his house. It had windows on its upper story that opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times each day he would get on his knees and pray and offer praise before his God. He continued to do that, just as he had been doing before this. Then these men came as a group and found Daniel praying and seeking favor from his God. They then went and asked the king about the decree. "Your Majesty, did you not sign a decree that anyone who prays to any god or person for 30 days except to you, your Majesty, would be thrown into the den of lions?" The king answered, "Indeed I did. The order is established as a law of the Medes and the Persians that cannot be revoked." Then they responded to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, does not pay attention to you, your Majesty, or to the decree that you signed. Instead, 3 times each day he is praying his prayers." When the king heard this report, he was very upset about it, but he was determined to save Daniel. So until sunset he worked hard to rescue him. Then these men came as a group to the king and kept saying to the king, "You know, your Majesty, that it is the law of the Medes and the Persians that every decree or statute that the king establishes cannot be changed." Then the king gave the order, and Daniel was brought and thrown into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the pit. The king sealed it with his signet ring and the signet rings of his nobles so that nothing could be changed with regard to Daniel's situation. Then the king went to his palace. He spent the night without food, and no entertainment was brought before him. But he could not sleep. At dawn the king arose as soon as it was light and hurried to the lion's den. As he came near the pit, he cried out in a fearful voice. The king said to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God, whom you serve continually, able to rescue you from the lions?" Then Daniel spoke with the king. "Your Majesty, may you live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the mouth of the lions. They have not hurt me because he found me innocent in his presence. Also before you, your Majesty, I have committed no crime." Then the king was very glad and said that Daniel should be brought up from the pit. So Daniel was brought up from the pit, and he was unharmed because he trusted in his God. The king gave the order, and those men who maliciously accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den, they, their children, and their wives. They had not reached the bottom of the pit when the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in the entire earth, "May your peace and prosperity increase. I give this command throughout my royal dominion. People should continually tremble and be afraid before the God of Daniel, because he is the living God, who endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed, and his dominion is eternal. He rescues and he saves. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth." So he saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius, that is, during the reign of Cyrus the Persian.